I'm going to really just be talking about some of the evidence that we have collected to really put the case for dementia inclusivity using nature. And here's a couple of our, I think, lovely pictures from the project. It gives you a flavour of the Tower of London one project, the Birds of Prey Centre, and there's another one which you'll hear a little bit more about in one of the presentations to come. So what am I going to talk to you about? Really, I'm going to sort of talk about the research process we've put together to get to the point where we are today and talk about some of the headlines. I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty academic stuff. I really want to give you a sort of a flavour of what we've done to really answer this question. What's this relationship between nature, dementia and the visitor economy? Nature and dementia is not something new, the researchers, and in fact you can go right back to the Victorian period with the building of hospitals and asylums where nature was built into the process. So it's, I think, something we've started to realise that if you can help the visitor economy organisations to innovate, then I think there's a win-win situation. What sort of research did we do? Well, to look at this relationship, we've looked at a whole range of techniques, and those techniques sort of span the obvious, which Linda talks about, the literature searchings, interviewing people, focus groups. But I think the key point here is all of this research is underpinned by co-creation. So we're using the research to inform what we were doing as we were going along, and not just an academic process to publish at the end of it. It's a very applied process. As well as some participant observation, we've got people from the advisory group here as well, which had a key role in that co-creation process. I hope that you'll hear a bit more about that with the projects this afternoon, particularly the Strawberry Hill one, where the actual co-creation was really live with the creation of the sensory train. And we had a knowledge exchange forum which talked about how to develop these projects. I think the key here is not to come in with the agenda of what you want to do, but let businesses innovate and help to steer them and to push these projects along. And I think that's really one of the successes of the ENLIVEN project. And this whole process of co-creation was about bringing together these three groups of people living with dementia, stakeholders and the businesses, and then informing that with research and policy. So it's trying to also, I think, bring in some of the advocacy as well that is out there to put forward what needs to be done and try to marry that together so that with the supply of experiences from the visitor economy and the demand from people with dementia. The sort of principles that underpinned ENLIVEN, I've summarised really to three things. Innovation, and that's what the funders were absolutely clear about we had to do. This is an innovative process. It isn't about doing more of the same. It's trying to help create new things, but also the co-creation with people with dementia. They have to be at the heart of the whole process, because if you don't have that at the heart of the process, then the final experience won't meet their needs. And also and you've got a copy of the report, create more accessible research for a wide range of audiences, not the standard academic publication, which will go to a limited number of audiences, because that's how it's designed for other academics. This report isn't. So some of the headline findings from the interviews, and I come from a tourism and leisure background, so I will kick off and say that the assumption that dementia changes people's leisure behaviour is perhaps a reasonable assumption post-diagnosis, but it does not cease. And that's the key point here. There is an opportunity there to look at how people adapt their behaviour and to design the experiences to fit that adaptation. But as Linda pointed out at the very beginning, you have to overcome barriers. And some of the advisory group will have seen some of the barriers, and some of the groups that came, for example, through the tower also help with advising on those barriers. And you could see that, in the real world, there are things that have to be overcome. Also, everyone is an individual. So going back again to the point that Linda said, you can create some generalizations, but you have to be aware they don't fit everybody. So you've got to always be aware of nuancing what you do, and that nature is a very important sensory experience for people with dementia. From the interviews, I think 4 key points arose. And I've already highlighted some of these, but there are some barriers, that there is a whole diversity of needs. You can't just highlight 1 or 2 things. And again, there are diverse adaptations that are needed. And that's something for organisations to negotiate in the discussions. And then how you can build upon that with businesses so that you get this win-win. And so that you get also an approach which starts to address practical barriers and moves you along to inclusivity. But I think an important point I've learned from this project and working with Linda and others is that it isn't always physical barriers. Psychosocial ones are also very, very important. And the way in which people perceive barriers that actually may not be there. And then, for example, some of these pilot projects bringing people into environments they might have feared or been unsure about, you see actually that it easily overcomes those barriers. How have the businesses responded from the business research? And I think this won't come as a surprise to anybody. You need a champion in the organisation. You have to be passionate about whatever you're doing. And if you're not, I think it's going to be really difficult to push this agenda forward. And many of the organisations that we've worked with were at an early stage of their journey towards dementia inclusivity. So they're looking for expertise and knowledge, and that's how we could bring together people with dementia, some of our academic expertise, and best practice from other organisations that have been doing this. So it's a learning process. And again, to reiterate what Linda said, and I think, Ross from Visit England is in the audience, and I think Ross would agree with this. It's the unintended consequences of doing this also helps address other wider accessibility issues for other groups. So it isn't just a tunnel vision focus on dementia. It's actually doing this can unlock other things, and vice versa. Doing other accessibility projects can unlock things for people with dementia. So there's a bigger world out there that you have to connect with when you're doing this sort of work. And also bear in mind that post-COVID, many visitor economy businesses have been under extreme financial pressure that you can't expect the unexpected from. So you've got to be very realistic when working with them, what I think you can achieve in a time frame. And I think what you will hear from most of the presentations, please bear in mind that these outcomes have been achieved in often 6 to 9 month period from start to finish. So these haven't been gestating for 3 years. They're very, very sharp outcomes in a very short period of time. So what works? Well, we know what works in the heritage sector and in museums and indoors. And, we're very fortunate to be here today because of the generosity of historic royal palaces with this venue, but they have a long track record with working on the indoors and working in heritage. So we know about that, but what about the outdoors? The projects will talk for themselves. I don't need to tell you about these projects. I think they have a lovely story to tell you. And I think the key thing is that the learnings about the innovations, nature isn't predictable. You cannot plan for what's going to happen very easily. So you've got to be aware that things like weather and temperature can have a big impact. Events and activities in the outdoors are challenging, but when they work, they're fantastic. They're a real huge impact on people's well-being, and they're enjoyable. And of course, there are potential perceived risks that you've got to be able to mitigate and manage and try and preempt. But I would still argue that there are much greater rewards if you could move into the nature and outdoor environment with people with dementia than simply taking, I think, a slightly easier option, which is focusing on what we know works well indoors. So there are challenges, but it also, I think, one thing you will hear from the project is how this has helped to re-engage people post-diagnosis to encourage them back into nature. And from a sort of a business perspective, I think there are these 5 processes. If you're going to plan for this, you've got to create a vision of what you want, audit the site, and we help some organisations with that process, and Visit England has pushed this agenda forward with accessibility more recently, which is really good to see. Co-create the experience with people with dementia and other stakeholders. Importantly, evaluate it as you're developing it and then implement it. So the planning process, I think, are these five steps. And what are some of the sort of the key things that might come out of this? Nature is at the core of this, and I think then there are a series, you can see it like unfolding an onion. You've got the site, and then you start to then look at the experience options you could create. And once you've done that, there are other ways of adding value as well. And I'm hopefully going to say a couple of things about that adding value process. This isn't everything that's important. I've picked what I think are the top 5 things that are really key. The welcome to people with dementia is absolutely fundamental. And I've been very fortunate with the projects that I worked on, that the welcome was unparalleled in my experience, even going to a visitor attraction. It was really, really superb. You've got to have a well-designed visitor journey, and that doesn't just mean on site, it also means from the point of leaving home to getting back home, because there are a lot of barriers which the actual business can't control. It has to be people-centric. You can't do this at a distance. You have to engage with people, and you need very good project management skills. They're fundamental to actually moving these projects on, as well as communication. And as I've already mentioned, you have to have a champion to actually drive this sport. So I'm going to stop there because I think we've got a lot to get through today. I don't want us to be running over time.